Disney Lucasfilm's The Acolyte, a somewhat Star Wars story. It had lightsabers. It's being effectively erased from existence, even from the Disney store, it seems, as no merchandise can be found any longer.
Do you know what the word nada means?
But we need to actually address the facts of why this show was canceled, and we did some of that the other night, and, well, hopefully, for the people out there that still don't get it, this might help.
No dough, no show.
Renegade Online. There's a lot of apparent emotion attached to this show for a lot of Disney shills. And let's be honest, that's what they are. And here's the thing. You know, we know now, because they've admitted it on their own live streams in many cases, a lot of these same people that have been shilling for the Acolyte now for months are the same people that were treated to very nice, all expenses paid trips out to California by Ubisoft and then by extension Disney to go out and take a look at the new Star Wars Outlaws video game that Ubisoft is making in tandem with Lucasfilm. And they were comped with some nice rooms, airfare, taken out and wined and dined and all this kind of stuff. And a lot of these same people now are complaining that the show is being canceled. And we're getting some absolutely hilariously bad comparisons from that perspective. Some of them talking about things like the Clone Wars and other TV shows that, well, they were given more than one chance to get audiences. Well, there's some very big differences that none of these people seem to be talking about that we are going to talk about here. This was a business decision by the Walt Disney Company. The idea that Disney, after the last God knows how many years of us chronicling this on YouTube, and I don't mean just me, not just here on Valliant, Renegade, and the Renegade Nation, but all of our friends out there, talking about Geeks and Gamers, talking about Gary over at Nerdrotic, Doomcock, Side Scrollers, Craig over there has been covering this. I mean, there's so many people out there. Ryan Kinnell, Midnight's Edge, Echo Base Network. The list can go on and on and on. That have been talking about the issues with Disney for years. Not the rumor stuff, that's a different topic, but the actual news items. Disney has been antagonistic for a long time towards fandoms, especially with Star Wars. And Disney has never seemed to give in to social media anything. They drive the narrative. They are not pressured by it. So I'm going to push back a little bit on this idea from some of these Disney shills, and I'll show you some in a minute, that Disney caved to us. That sounds great. It sounds wonderful, but it simply is not the entire story. I don't want to say it's untrue, because there is an element of truth to it that Disney did cave to us. And when I say us, I mean those of us in this audience, the audience of Friday Night Tights, the audience of Geeks and Gamers and Nerdrotic and Echo Base and so on, and Midnight's Edge and blah, blah, blah. The people that cover it to an extent, but not in the way that they're saying. But we all know the story here by now. For those of you who don't, and there may be a few of you out there, the Acolyte canceled. Now, there has been, since the story broke, there has been some dithering in some places on if this was a hard cancellation or if this was just, we just decided not to renew it. Either way, the show is done, right? It's a semantics issue if you're going to go that route. The reality is, whether the show was opened for a season 2 and then they canceled proceeding with season 2, or it was just one season and they shut the door on it, the result is the same. It doesn't matter. Now, I've said before with the Acolyte, apart from it having turned out to be exactly what we thought it would, which is about the worst thing we've ever seen on television. And I mean that from an objective perspective. That's something else we're going to dispel here. This is not a right-wing, misogynist, racist, bigots shut down. No. The show was objectively bad. We've covered it. A lot of our friends out there have covered it. A lot of us, almost all of us, came to the exact same conclusions, episode by episode by episode. And we hadn't talked to each other before our videos came out. Think about this. Think about all the people out there that reviewed The Acolyte week after week after week. They're all watching it live as it debuts on Disney Plus, the moment that it drops. And we're all insta-reacting to it, recording, or on live streams. We're doing it right then and there, and then we immediately go to the editing bay. We put our videos together. We put it out. The amazing thing was all of us were reaching the exact same technical conclusions, meaning that how did this character change on a dime from one scene to the next? What they just did here makes no sense. They never explained this. It happened week after week after week after week. These are the objective truths of this show. These are the objective facts that people were basing their opinions on. Doesn't matter what the critics say, and I don't want to hear about review bombing. The show legitimately turned out to be bad, and it cost about $200 million to produce, and that was before Disney would have spent another, at least, I'm guessing, easily $50 million to market this show. Think of all of the ads that they did on Google, YouTube, social media, Facebook, X, whatever else. Every time you saw a trailer pumped out there for The Acolyte, that was Disney, Lucasfilm, Star Wars paying for that to be placed right in front of you. That cost money. That's not part of the production budget. Okay? When they say the production budget was $180 million, I remind folks that that was not the completed, I don't think, number. That was something that came out in Variety magazine, allegedly from Leslie Headland. I've said I think there's a translation issue there. And I don't mean in the English language, I mean in the language of currency. I think maybe it was 180 million British pounds sterling, which would be about 200 plus million US dollars. We know that again because we saw the financial reports that said they had spent $50 million on this show, The Acolyte, 50 million US dollars before a single camera rolled. So I find it hard to believe they did everything they did plus all the post-production and finished at 180 million. That would be a new one for Disney. It's not out of the realm of possibility, but it seems to me to be rather unlikely. That being said, that is part of why this show got the hit that it did. So, again, an exclusive scoop that came to Deadline. The story of The Acolyte will not continue. Lucasfilm opting not to proceed with the second season, starring Amanda Stenberg. So some sources, ostensibly from Lucasfilm, passed this information along. They say the news is not entirely surprising. The Acolyte did okay with critics, 78% on RT, but divided Star Wars fans, which was reflected in its overall viewership. Let's be clear, like I said in the video, there was, right here, bar none, there was no division in the fans on this show. This show absolutely brought fans together in disgust. You notice how anytime a story leans in a certain, or at least what the media wants to make in a certain political direction, it's referred to as controversial. And then if it's the other way and it actually is controversial, it's never referred to that way. It's kind of the same thing here. This is really simple. You scored an 18%. I'm tired of hearing about review bombing on this. It was justified. Whether everybody that voted for this watched an episode or not doesn't matter. It was actually justified. It was a terrible show, objectively terrible show. It was poorly written by a bunch of people who, frankly, never should work in Hollywood again. There is no reason that any competent head of studio would hire Leslie Headland to showrun and write a television show ever again after this. There's no way. It was that bad. The buck stops with her. She ultimately was responsible for this production as the showrunner. Right? Now, we can go a step past that, obviously, and say that Kathleen Kennedy should have taken one look at this and gone, this is an unfinished project. This is like a really rough first draft. This needs a lot more work. But Kathleen Kennedy, frankly, does not have the talent or the chops to do that. Again, she's not responsible for all the hits that she was a part of in the 70s and 80s. Those were created by Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Robert Zemeckis, Richard Donner. We can go on down the line. Chris Columbus, so on and so forth. Kathleen Kennedy was just along for the ride. It could have been Alan Bergman, who would have been largely responsible for overseeing as a co-chairman of the Walt Disney Studio System. He and Dana Walden, although Dana Walden, my understanding is she's much more on the television side. But Alan Bergman could have taken a look at this and said, no, this is $200 million. This is what we got. No way. We got to fix this. Bob Iger. Bob Iger, who says he watches everything that Disney makes before it goes out 3 to 5 times. His words. He even talked about this at the Morgan Stanley Media and Telecom Conference last year in 2023, February, March 2023. Remember that? Everybody was still debating, not everybody, but a lot of people out there, some people out there, maybe just a few, we're still debating whether or not The Acolyte was a real show. Bob Iger gets on stage, says, oh no, I've just seen footage of The Acolyte. It looks fantastic. It'll be coming to Disney Plus next year in 2024. Well, that was it. It's coming out. I mean, we already knew it was coming out, but that ended the debate. He said it looked great. It looked fantastic. Again, is there anybody at the Walt Disney Company that actually really, truly watches this kind of trash before it gets out? This is why Disney has gotten the reputation, and that's the point of all of this. This was the point of talking about all the Marvel stuff as well. Disney has gotten the reputation of piss-poor quality control in their studio system. And yes, they can point to recent hits, like we mentioned earlier, with Inside Out 2 and Deadpool and Wolverine. That, however, and I think Wall Street is well aware of this now. They weren't a couple of years ago, it seems, but I think now they're at least coming around, that is not necessarily guaranteed to be repeatable at Disney. They're wondering if this was a flash in the pan this summer, or if this is truly a turnaround. Only time will tell. But as of right now, we just simply don't have enough data. But with The Acolyte, we do. The Acolyte is gone, and for good reason. It's a $200 million production nightmare dumpster fire that fans absolutely didn't like. Not only did it turn in the worst scores on Rotten Tomatoes, but it also turned in by far and away the worst viewership of any Star Wars property on Disney+. As the Nielsen data showed, as our friends at That Park Place, like John Trent, reported a few days ago, it turned in roughly half the audience that the season finale of Andor did. And people want to know, why is it that Andor is getting a second season? At least allegedly. I think they're going into production. I think it's actually happening. But why is Andor getting a second season? It also cost $200 million. Well, the answer now seems to me to be very simple. We now know pretty much what the viewership threshold is at the Walt Disney Company to take another chance. And that viewership threshold for Disney Plus apparently is Andor. If Andor got a second season and The Acolyte didn't, and The Acolyte was that far below Andor, I think we have our story. Remember that Andor was not originally intended to be a multi-season show. At least not insofar as I remember. Neither was Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan Kenobi was billed as a limited run, 6-episode, whatever it was, mini-series. Andor was kind of set up to be the same thing. The problem was, of course, in the first season, they didn't have the most memorable character, K2SO, because Alan Tudyk was not signed on for it. Now, allegedly, Alan Tudyk is involved with this second season. That might actually pick up the viewership quite significantly. The other side of Andor was, while people accused it of being a bit of a slow burn and a boring show, I don't remember if anybody really called it a poorly written show. It was well acted. It was at least decently written. Things made sense. It was just a very slow show that some people found boring. Fine. But it showed promise. The Acolyte, on the other hand, was a show that was done horribly, that was horribly written, and therefore we got bad direction, and frankly, for the most part, overwhelmingly, with a couple of exceptions, terrible acting performances. And I'm sorry, especially with Amanda Stenberg. There is no redeeming quality to this show. There's no reason to go to a second season. And again, I'm not sure if this show was ever really intended to have a second season to begin with, but clearly somebody inside Disney Lucasfilm decided it was necessary to leak to Deadline that we're done. We're out. We're done with this show. The Acolyte's over. Fine. Moving on. And maybe, just maybe, that was a rather, let's call it a subtle method of perhaps trying to let people know that they're trying to get serious about things at Disney. And I don't mean that necessarily all of the woke DEI stuff is going to disappear tomorrow. It isn't, unfortunately, I don't think. But it does mean they may be trying to get back to form in the business sense, meaning that no, we need to actually produce products, especially at the financial scale of what these kind of shows demand. $200 million, apparently, which I still don't get. I did not see $200 million worth of production value in this show, and I don't think anybody else did either, except for maybe a few shills. But they're going to have to actually turn something out that brings in the audience, that justifies these types of financial expenditures. And I'm hoping that's what the case is. And again, going back to this is what I'm talking about with the threshold. Andor is apparently the threshold because there was a lot of concern about Andor. Andor at the time turned in the worst numbers for a Disney Plus Star Wars show. And again, people, oh, well, there's other stuff on Disney Plus that was way under that. Yeah, well, other stuff on Disney Plus didn't cost $215 million like this one did. Andor. That's the difference. If you're going to turn in audience numbers like The Acolyte that come in at half of what Andor did, then that means that either one, you cancel the show, or number two, if you're actually stupid enough, and I do mean stupid enough, to greenlight a second season for this trash, then the budget has to be adjusted accordingly. You have to have a budget on these shows that is commensurate with the audiences that they get. Meaning that there's no, first of all, the budget for the first season shouldn't have been more than $100 million. And that was the mistake. Too many problems with this thing. You didn't hire the right people to do the show. You certainly didn't hire anybody that had the professional credentials, that much has become obvious, to run this show and write it. And that's the biggest crime. $200 million production budget, and you couldn't even hire capable writers. That's sad. Oh, but they threw Darth Plagueis in it. Shut up. I don't want to hear any more about it. We're going to forget that ever happened because it was stupid. Make sure you're subscribed to Valliant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.